Right, you can start.
Well, welcome members and officers to this evening's virtual COVID-19 recovery working group meeting. We're going to begin with apologies for absence. I understand that there is one Adam from Councillor Hardware who was minded to attend, and also Councillor Perrin.
Yeah.
Those are the apologies I've had. Are there any further apologies for absence?
No, I think everyone else is here, aren't they?
Yep, from what I can see. Declarations of interest, are there any? I hear no declarations of interest. Let's move over to the minutes from the previous meeting. Are those minutes agreed?
Yep.
Yep, okay, I'd take that as the minutes are agreed. And I will organise to sign them physically as we're on this virtual meeting. Are there any matters arising as a result of the minutes?
Yep. Please.
Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, so going through. I'm not aware that we've had an update on COVID since about sort of January. The weekly updates seem to have stopped at that point. So was there a reason for that?
Just repeat that again, sorry, Councillor.
I'm not aware that we've had any COVID update. We used to get weekly COVID updates, and they stopped about the beginning of January, as far as I can see. And I just wonder whether there's been a reason for that, and also whether or not we've managed to ascertain whether or not there's any data at all on the economic impact of COVID on local businesses.
Well, first of all, on the so I heard you, sorry about that. I've got a weak connection at the moment, so if I break up, forgive me. So from what I heard there, first of all, on the economic impacts, Councillor Edwards, one of the things that the council is going to look to do is commission some research. We're just looking at the parameters of which we might do that. We might do it with a neighbouring authority to look at the wider picture of where we are in terms of our local economies, and to share the insights from that research might be worth pursuing. We're looking at that, but we've certainly got budget for research to look at the wider impacts on the local economy, and we intend to do that. So that is on the radar, but there might be an opportunity here to do something with another neighbouring authority, which might be promising. On your point around the updates, COVID updates that have regularly come through, perhaps one of the officers, Simon Freeman or Andrew Berry, wants to cover that, because I'm still seeing regular updates come through, but you may want to cover Councillor's specific point around the updates that we do regularly receive on a weekly basis.
Well, I don't recall seeing one since the beginning of January. I mean, but I don't know whether that's just me or whether that's been the case.
If I could, Chair, I'll just maybe make a comment there. I think there's been some managerial changes within the council, Councillor Edwards, and I think it's just unfortunately fallen between different teams to manage the production of the notes. So it's just an oversight, unfortunately. So and I think Andrew is going to give us a bit of an update tonight. So apologies for that.
Are there any further matters arising?
Excuse me, just one moment. Yes, the other issue was that it was being suggested that we would be being proactive in terms of contacting the hard to reach groups. I wonder if you could tell me what actions actually the council did take to reach the hard to reach groups.
So in terms of hard to reach groups, the the discussion around the hard to reach groups was the interaction that we've had, that you've participated in, council members, around the interaction we have with the West Essex CCG and the work that they have been doing in combination with the council and in briefing members around targeting, in particular, homeless individuals. We've had success in vaccinating a number of homeless people to make sure that they've got the vaccine. So that's one example of one of those hard to reach groups that have been supported as a result of the collaboration that there's been between the council and our primary healthcare colleagues. But the wider work that the CCG has been doing is working with the different umbrella groups for different, for example, Neela Hibbert and the work that she does to support certain communities within Harlow. That work has been ongoing to make sure that those groups are communicated with if there are any issues around communications or access to primary care facilities. That is being addressed by our colleagues in the West Essex CCG. And what the council has done is facilitated some of those conversations as well. And so I think we're comfortable with the level of engagement that we have seen since we last met around meeting the requirements of some of those hard to reach groups.
I'm slightly surprised at your last comment, given that the numbers looking at today. So, for example, nationally, 91% of the or thereabouts have had a first dose. In Harlow, it's 77%. In terms of nationally, 65% have had a booster. In Harlow, it's 51%. So we're still substantially down. And secondly, I'm a bit surprised as well in terms of the discussion that we had with the CCG. Well, one of the things that was raised, or one of the questions that was raised, was the non-digital, making people aware of where they could actually get the vaccinations and what have you. And I wasn't aware of any evidence to show that there's been either notices were up to say where you could go and get your vaccination around. That there was nothing up in the town centre apart from in the Harvey Centre itself, and that was upstairs when there was nothing up downstairs. There was nothing up, as far as I could see, on any of the notice boards in Harlow saying where people could get vaccinations. So hence my argument about, or not argument, hence my point about what was actually done to contact the hard to reach groups. I'm not really aware of anything particularly being done, but I may be being slightly.
No, I take your point, Councillor. I mean, I did give you an example that there was one particular initiative was to vaccinate homeless people in the town. That was successful, and that's a hard to reach group. And I'm really pleased that we got that done. The wider work that you talk about, clearly the local authority, the CCG, follow government guidelines. There has been a withdrawing of the measures that we have seen around the steady increases in infection levels that we're seeing nationally as a result of those infections coming down. We're going to hear from Andrew Barrage in a moment, who's going to give us an overview of the Harlow context, which will be helpful. And in my comments around the hard to reach group, what I would say to you is that is separate from the discussion around ensuring people go and get not only their first, but their second and their booster vaccine. That work is ongoing, and it's the vulnerable groups of people, the hard to reach groups of people, that are still an important element of that. But the wider piece of work, absolutely, the council is working with the health professionals to ensure that we encourage people to get their vaccines. Absolutely important, absolutely critical for the effort going forward. And our colleagues, as we all know, in primary healthcare, have been doing a fantastic job here to try and get those numbers up. The communication, absolutely, there are people that don't look at social media, don't look at digital forms of communication. And I know that the CCG rightly has been writing out to target groups of people to encourage them to take up the vaccine, the vaccine process. So that work is ongoing. We're still, as ever, we will have a joint meeting with the West Sussex CCG and PAH coming up quite soon as well to see where we've got to on that front. So those lines of communications remain the same. Are there any further matters arising? I hear no further matters arising. Therefore, let us go back to the agenda and have an update on the COVID-19 position. Andrew Bramage, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to share my screen with a few slides. Hopefully,
I can see that.
you can see that. If I can, yeah. Okay, so I've got some information which I've collated today on cases in Harlow, vaccination figures and hospital figures. So as you see from this slide, the case rate in Harlow has come down quite a bit in recent weeks and sits below the Essex and East of England's average, in fact comfortably below the East of England's average. And these are some of the figures that were published at 4 o'clock this afternoon. The figures in brackets show the data as of yesterday, so showing falls across the board. I've highlighted Cambridge and Peterborough because the East of England figures are particularly skewed by those two local authority areas where case rates are in 4 figures. So still some of the few places in the country where that's the case. So that explains why the East of England figures are a bit out of step with the national position. This slide shows the change in the case rate in Harlow from March of last year up to yesterday, in fact. And you'll see that the big peak at the beginning of January when the rate just about hit 3,000 and a steady fall, a sharp fall since then, which has been replicated across Essex and actually reflects the national picture. So that reflects the spike as a result of the Omicron variant that hit the country in December and early January, and significant falls since then. And hopefully that will continue to be the case. In terms of vaccinations, these are in fact, Councillor Edwards referred to some of these figures a short while ago. Again, these are taken from the official figures on the government websites. 167,000 vaccine doses administered in Harlow. This was up to a week last Sunday when the latest figures were published. And I've provided the split of that 167,000 into first doses, second doses, and the booster doses. You'll see quite a differential there between the Harlow figures and the national figures in terms of percentages. And these are the figures that are published relate to the population over the age of 12. I would put a note of caution into Harlow figures actually, because this is based on the population estimates, and the population estimate that the government used for Harlow for over 12s is 84,000, which I think is overstated, because if you believe the figures that are published, then the total population of Harlow would currently be just under 100,000. Yeah. So I think there's some inaccuracies in the population figures. I would suspect that the actual position of Harlow is somewhere between the figures stated there and the national figure. And until there's accurate figures from the 21 census, which won't be for a few years yet, we won't have accurate population data. Undoubtedly, the position on vaccinations in Harlow is below the national average. It was close to the national average 2 or 3 months ago. So I think the big drive for vaccinations would appear to have been less successful in Harlow than in other parts of the country because the differential has widened. I don't believe it's as wide as these figures suggest, but it is still a gap. And then just to conclude on the statistical information, hospital admissions is the other key metric that we look at. There's been consistent fall across the country in hospital admissions, 13% over the last week. That's consistent across Essex. In PAH, again, we're seeing a fall in numbers. The numbers in hospital had been pretty steady for a long time last year at around sort of the 20-ish mark, and grew quite quickly after Christmas, early January, up to 74 by the end of January. As of today, the numbers in PAH are down to 60, and hopefully we'll see a continued decline there. However, the final point there is that only 2 of those patients are in intensive care, and that's been fairly consistent for a long time now. The numbers of people who are on ventilator support or in intensive care has been very low, even with the significant rise in Omicron cases over the last few months. So that's just a quick summary of the position as of today, really, and some figures that I've pulled today from various government sources. I had hoped we'd be able to get a bit more information to you today on the breakdown of some of the cases in Harlow. We used to get daily reports from the UK Health Security Agency on the COVID situation locally and regionally. They, since about a month ago, have switched to being weekly reports, published on a Tuesday, so that should have been quite timely for today's meeting. Unfortunately, today's report is late due to data compilation issues, I'm told, at UK HSA. So we don't have that today, unfortunately, but if there's further detail that we can extract from that in the next couple of days, then we can send that round with the minutes, perhaps. But happy to take any questions on those figures, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. Are there any questions from members?
Yeah. Oh,
So you indicating, Maggie?
yes.
Yeah, come on in.
A couple of questions. Why is the vaccination pickup in Harlow lower? And the second one, the deaths in nationally would appear that not all the deaths that have had relationships to COVID are accurate, that COVID was not the cause of death. Has that
Maggie, was that it, Maggie?
I think we've lost Maggie.
Oh, right. Okay. I mean, the vaccination figures are clearly, that's been a fairly consistent pattern over the last year, actually. The vaccination numbers in Harlow have been lower here than certainly across the rest of Essex. That's been a fairly consistent pattern. And as you said, Chair, earlier in this meeting, there's been a lot of work with the CCG to target resources in Harlow with vaccination buses in various locations to try and boost the numbers. Numbers have certainly gone up, but we still see quite a big differential. In relation to the position on deaths, I haven't got the figures here on death rates, but I think it will be some time before there's full analysis of that, and the figures that are published show deaths from any reason at 28 days after a COVID test, but of course there are also people who die probably as a result of COVID a period longer than 28 days that aren't captured in the figures. So I think there will probably be a lot of academic studies in future years about identifying the actual numbers.
Thank you, Andrew. Maggie, did you have a follow-up question? I think you got cut off prematurely there. Oh, I think we've lost.
no, I'm
there?
back.
You're back. Yeah, go ahead.
That's it. That's the only questions I had, Charles.
No worries. Thank you, Councillor Holcombe. Councillor Saggers.
Based on some of the data we were seeing on the weekly briefings before Christmas, it was showing that we were trending about 5 or 6% lower. Based on the figures today, we seem to have dropped to about 12% below. From what we know from early adoption of COVID jabs for the sort of 12 and 13-year-olds, there was also a rate just before Christmas where a lot of the schools were suffering. Do we think that's had an impact? Because obviously school children who are 12 and 13 would have to then wait 12 weeks further before they can get their first dose. So is that kind of where we've kind of slowed down, because we have quite a growing school population at the moment?
That's probably a good observation, actually, Councillor Saggers, that, yeah, I mean, a large part of the positive cases pre-Christmas were school-aged children. And, you know, they started to become eligible for vaccination in the autumn, late autumn of last year. And obviously, yes, there's a time lag now before people are eligible for second doses and boosters, although that's been reduced. So you would hope that vaccination numbers will continue to increase as a result of people coming forward for their second and third jabs. I guess we also have to make sure we keep the message out there that people should continue to get vaccinated. You know, with easing of restrictions and the numbers coming down significantly, there may be a perception in the wider community that it's no longer important. So I'm sure we'll still have to continue to push the message.
Any further questions from you, Councillor Saggers?
Do we have any plans to liaise with the schools? Because obviously, potentially, there's an opportunity to get a lot of vaccinations done, possibly as you head towards Easter, where that's probably going to be a time when people try to get away, to mass vaccinate a large number of teenage children in one place at one time, to help those figures and obviously help the town, because there'll be a lot of interaction at Easter time with the kids being off for a long period.
Thank you for that, Councillor Saggers. I am aware that the West Sussex CCG is constantly looking at the access and availability of the vaccine for a range of age groups. One of those considerations is young people of school age, but they are rightly taking the lead on those decisions. Right, any further questions, Councillor Saggers?
No, that's all for me.
Good stuff. Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. There's a very interesting report on the Sky News last week over analysis of excess deaths, and the chart they had showed that the number of excess deaths expected in this month or this week was somewhat below the number we'd seen over the last decade. I was wondering if anybody had any local information on that. I mean, for example, over the last two winters, the number of people with influenza has fallen away dramatically because we're all isolating and taking care. And you know, there were considerable numbers of deaths from influenza, which was being overlooked in comparison with the number of deaths from COVID. So, you know, is there any local information or regional information on that?
Andrew Bramage?
No, actually, I don't have any specific information on that. As I say, I think, you know, there will be a lot of academic studies in the next few years looking at precisely these sorts of issues, actually, and how robust was the data at the time. But I'm certainly not aware of any local information on that.
Okay.
Any further questions?
No, thank you.
I think Councillor Edwards wants to come in.
Yeah, just briefly, have we got any sort of data? I mean, I know we've got the national data on and unemployment, which is the figures there, certainly in terms of the employment rate, seems to be things are holding up fairly well. Have we got the latest figures for Harlow at all in terms of where we are in terms of employment figures at all?
Well, employment figures, the ONS has set out its labour market statistics today. There will be regional labour market statistics that are aggregated down as a result of that. They will not have been prepared in time for this meeting because they only came out today, Councillor Edwards. But point taken around the data that's required to inform this committee.
Right, thank you. No, that's useful.
No, that's fair enough. Okay, any further questions before we move on? I see no further questions. We now move to a business recovery update. Simon Freeman, if you'd like to take us through that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just really going to give the group a quick update on our current round of grant payments to local businesses. This sort of just immediately before Christmas and then subsequently early in the new year. Two new grant streams were announced by the government around the Omicron issue and these restrictions that were imposed as a result of that spike again in infections. So we had two streams, one specifically targeted at the hospitality and leisure sector. Total allocation to Harlow was just short of £520,000. We launched that scheme towards the end of January. It's now been running about 3 weeks. We targeted specifically businesses that fell into the category that was identified by the government for those grants to be paid. So about 137 businesses in total that fell into the categories that we felt should be caught by the guidance and the criteria. And as at today, we've actually physically paid out to 68 of our local businesses, a total of just short of £253,000. So about 50% of businesses and about 50% of the funding has been paid out. We've still got a few applications that we're waiting for some further information from, but that's gone really well. We've actually taken it upon ourselves to again go back to the businesses that hadn't yet applied, and we've tried to encourage them to put an application through for the funding. So we are being proactive in terms of trying to attract further payments from that grant stream. So, and again, we will continue to pay those grants out subject to successful applications through till the end of March. The second stream, which was another additional restrictions grant variation, again, we've got about another £500,000 of funding for that support, basically to businesses that didn't fall into the hospitality and leisure definitions in the previous grant that I was just talking about. At the moment, we've not really been paying that as long as the other one. We've only been paying this for a couple of weeks. We've had 33 applications for grant money, and a number have actually applied early, because what we've done with the ARG is we've allocated it into 4 stages. So we're open for stages 1 and 2 at the moment, which is particular business types. And then we move into stage 3 and stage 4 as we progress through the month into March. So we've actually had 10 applications which weren't successful because they were shops essentially, and shops don't fall into the categories under the government guidance. We then currently we're waiting information from another couple of businesses that have applied in phase 1 and 2, and we've paid out 2 grants at the moment under the ARG funding phases 1 and 2. What we have got in the pipeline is around about 16 applications that are actually for phases 3 and 4. So we've accepted those applications, but we will wait until phase 3 and 4 opens so that we're fair to all the businesses that haven't yet applied that might fall into those categories. And we actually have some that applied for ARG but are actually entitled to the hospitality and leisure grant. So we've reallocated those back into that grant stream, and we've been dealing with them and paying them the appropriate sums under the hospitality and leisure stream. So at the moment it's going reasonably well. I think we're going to struggle at the moment to utilise the full funding, but we continue to be as proactive as we can to encourage businesses to apply, and I hope that the majority of our funding will be paid out to local businesses between now and the end of March.
Simon, I'm grateful for that update. What I would also add is that the council launched its project that's funded by the government's Community Renewal Fund that is being delivered in partnership with Haven Gateway Partnership and the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. Opportunity Harlow, as it has been badged, was officially launched a couple of weeks ago now. The aim of this project is to act, in effect, as a gateway for small and medium-sized enterprises to access new opportunities through targeted procurement support. That is one element of the package of support that this council wants to bring to bear to support our businesses, and this is something that was explored in the Harlow Business Forum alongside celebrating National Apprenticeship Week. Are there any questions at all from members on this agenda item? Councillor Saggers, I see you indicating.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. We've talked about the business side. Do you have any figures on what was done? Because obviously I noticed we released a lot of press statements around the community groups and charities receiving funding. Do we have any details on how successful that was?
Important question, Councillor Saggers. Where we are, the council, I think you're referring to the press statements I issued around the partnership grants. Where we are, that is a pot of money of about 130,000. The council is has gone through the initial expressions of interest and is now in discussions with those organisations that have expressed an interest, so that we can get to a position where officers are able to allocate those partnership grants out. We have had a good level of interest, which is encouraging, from those community and voluntary groups, and so the officers are now getting on with that job, analysing the detail behind that, and we hope to be in a position soon to say more about that, probably at the next cabinet meeting, whereby a report will, where there are 2 cabinet meetings in March. It will be the later cabinet meeting, as I understand it, that we will have the full report there to discuss that at that meeting. But that work is well underway, and I'm encouraged by the level of interest from those groups. Any further questions on this agenda item?
Please.
Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, and I appreciate that there are several sort of funding pools now, or there's been several funding pools over the. Would it be useful just to sort of detail out for us what those funding pools are, and then what percentage of those funding pools has been allocated, as it were, so that one can see that under, I don't know, there were various titles given to each of those ones, so one could see, well, okay, under this particular scheme we've got X million pounds, this is the amount that's gone out. Under this particular scheme we've got X million pounds, this is the amount that's gone out, so that one can just sort of see, you know, where we stand in terms of all of the you know, where we stand overall, as it were, and then possibly sort of track it as it goes through. So I mean I was aware, for example, under the previous administration, although we gave out well over 30 odd million quid under one particular funding pool, there was a delay in processing for whatever reason. There was a delay, relatively small pool, but overall, you know, X million pounds was given out. So and there may well be reasons why different headings, different funding tracks have different timescales attached to them. So just to understand what's going on.
I think in fairness to the officers, and this straddles different administrations, communications around the monies that have been allocated as a result of the different funding pots that have been allocated has been communicated publicly, and that straddles both administrations and has been communicated regularly in updates as well. So I you know, and of course we've seen the latest publication for leisure and hospitality services and the respective grant funding support that was issued to them. I think in that press release, the figure was around, and some people will correct me if I'm wrong, about 160,000. That's now been revised following the update that Simon Freeman has provided the committee, but that's what went out, I think, around very early February, whereby there was an indication of the number of businesses written to, those businesses that received grant funding, and what was paid out. And that has been the regular flow of information that the council has shared, irrespective of administration. So I'm quite satisfied with that.
Yeah. No, I'm just, I mean, certainly just.
See what you mean, though.
Yeah. So we can say, okay, over the last X years, we paid out this under this particular heading, this under this particular heading, this under this particular heading. So this is what the allocations that we got. This is what we paid out under the particular. So it's, you know, we can then trace it through. Okay.
Any further questions from colleagues on this agenda item? Okay, I see no further questions. We move to matters of urgent business. There is one matter of urgent business. As a result of the government's decision to bring forward the ending of COVID restrictions and the fall in COVID cases that has been seen and presented tonight, I have taken the decision that we pause the COVID recovery group meetings at this moment in time, with the caveat that clearly, if there is an increase in infections in the town, this committee will be reactivated, and we will continue the cross-party consensus on that basis. Regular updates will continue with the West Essex CCG and our colleagues in PAH, and we will continue with the spirit around cross-party working, but following now the focus on, we're moving to a phase where the recovery really needs to be around, one, the local economy, and two, ensuring that the community groups that have done a fantastic amount of work over the last few years are supported, and those mechanisms are set out by the administration via Cabinet. And we've got, as Councillor Saggers has rightly highlighted, the partnership grants coming up to be discussed at those meetings. So that's where we are. I thank members for their attendance this evening. As there are no further matters, I call this meeting